Hello everybody and welcome back to the building restoration of this Fokker DR1, a model built from, I believe, a flare plan. Now when I got the model, something that was missing was an undercarriage, and I knew that I would have to tackle it at some stage, and I'd put it off simply because I knew it was going to involve some hard graft on my part. It's made of 5mm piano wire, which if you've ever had to work with this stuff, you'll know that it needs quite a bit of brute force to get it to the shape you want. In retrospect, I think I overcomplicated the bending process. I've gone for a hook there rather than a 90-degree bend along with the axle, which would have perhaps been easier. I knew I couldn't silver solder it because I would need so much heat to do that you destroy the annealing properties of the piano wire and that you end up with spaghetti. So I knew it had to be soldered with soft solder, and that's when I hit a snag. And the snag was that I just couldn't get it to solder at all. I couldn't get the solder to take to the piano wire, despite cleaning it, despite applying flux. It wasn't going to work. So I rang one of the club members that I know, Dave Slasser, and bless him, he came to my rescue straight away. In fact, he popped round the same day to give me a hand. And he pointed out that the issue was, one, I was probably using solder that was lead-free for environmental and health reasons. However, it's not as good as solder. It doesn't work as well. And the other point he said was mainly it's an issue with the flux. The flux I was using is really for small electronic work and wasn't designed for doing big lumps of copper pipe or metal of any kind. And when we applied the flux, lo and behold, straight away it worked immediately. Now, it looks a bit agricultural. It is a bit agricultural, but it does the job. It's strong, and it's going to be covered in anyway because it needs to be covered by what I call the axle wing, the lower wing. And that's part of what we're going to look at today in the video. You'll also notice that I've got these rather charming wheels on here. I picked them up from somebody who was trading them on a website at a good deal, good price. But when I got them, not through any problem with the person I purchased them off, I was disappointed in them, and that's because they didn't have a solid axle. Basically, this and this are just two outer plates. In fact, you can pull them apart, and that'll be really handy when it comes to painting them. However, it was quite clear that a plastic outer plate and inner plate, no matter how tough or thick it was, wasn't going to take the wear and tear that an axle would take. So I've had to machine these brass axle bearings, and I think they now serve the purpose. Another thing you'll notice, of course, is that the axle, well, apart from the fact it's way too long, I'll cut that to suit later on, but the axle's solid. It doesn't have any suspension at all. And I went that route simply because when I did a bit of research, because it didn't have an undercarriage, and I looked at 1/4 scale and 1/3 scale models, many people who built the model and flew it consistently, it said, frankly, the suspension just wasn't worth the hassle. It didn't really serve a massive purpose because the model tends to be fairly light on its feet. It takes off very quickly, and it can sort of float down. Well, that being the case, I took the easy option and I went for the solid axle. But I am going to need to make this wing that sits in here, and that's what we're going to look at now. So I'll just pause it and we'll look a little bit more closely at what I have. Here's a spare rib that I had from the destroyed upper wing when I was handed the model, and I've used that to actually draw up the reconstructed wing. And I've used this as a starting point for the axle wing. Now I've looked at photographs of the prototype, and obviously that's too large. But what I have found is if I make the wing ribs for this part that sort of size, it looks right when I take it on and put it next to the axle. So I'll show you what it looks like. So if I put that like that, you get an idea if it stops there, and based on the photographs that I've seen, that looks proportionally about correct. So that's the ribs that I'll need to make. The next issue is, on the flare kit, on the flare models, that wing sits between the axles and stops there. That obviously makes it very easy to construct and practical in terms of modelling purposes. But if you look at any of the photographs, you'll see that in fact there's part of the wing on the other side of the axle legs, and the undercarriage legs rather. So I need to extend it out beyond these, and these have to go through the upper surface to look right. And the other thing is, if you imagine that this is sitting on this axle, even if it was clamped like this, there's nothing to stop it floating all over the place. And there's a couple of possible ways of dealing with that. One would be to solder a leg onto this axle and clamp that to the wing, and that would stop it rotating and fix it in place. But that's quite an ugly solution, and I'm not too keen on that. The alternative is to have a plate on the axle that was probably soldered to a collet with a couple of holes in it, and they can then be screwed onto a plywood rib that sits here, and then I would be able to slide onto that the extension part that would locate against this, probably through a couple of dowels to line it up carefully. Now that seems quite convoluted, but I think it's the way I'm going to go. First thing to do will be to cut this out, see what it looks like, and then I'll make the two plywood ribs, because I'll need them for the outside anyway, and use them to draw up the remaining ones, and we'll work out where the spars will go and so on to fit in. Let's do that then. I think for the trailing edge, I'll cut out a notch here, and we'll have a flat trailing edge. If I cut this here for now, we'll worry about the bird mouth cut that needs to be made for the leaning edge in a moment. Just get the shape right. I think that works, and if you offer that up, try it against a wheel. Let's move this round so we can see, or you can see what I'm doing. So if I put that on, why am I struggling? It's the trouble with a big model, you struggle with more. That's it. Goodness me, that took some doing. Right. That looks about right. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So we'll go with that as a template. I'll cut 2 out of plywood now, and then I'll come back and we'll see how it looks. There we have the building blocks for this axle wing, as I'm calling it. They're 2 plywood aerofoils, which I'll use to make the end plates, but also they'll act as a sandwich to actually cut the stack of ribs that I'm going to require. I've also cut out a hardwood spar. It's a piece of sapele, this, and I need to cut a groove in it to just tilt this slightly, there you go, to fit into there. Now that in itself won't lock it because it'll rock about, but it'll be the basis on which the actual ribs are actually built up. I'm going to cover the upper layer with plywood, as was the prototype, because I think it needs to be solid. We don't want any buckling of the covering. I think the axle on this piece, the spars rather, that's the point at which the axle will go. So I need to cut a slot out of there, out of these, to take this wood in the same position, and then we'll work it out from there. How many spars are needed on the upper surface, how many ribs are required, do we need any spars on the upper surface? I think we almost certainly will. The trailing edge, so I'll fiddle about with that, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the final shape that I've come up with regarding cutting out for the supporting act to make this lower wing. This then is what I think I'm going to go with. The cutouts obviously signify where the spars are going to go. This hardwood bearer will go in the bottom with the slot cut out for the axle. These squares on the top, I'm going to make them in balsa, because the whole thing after all will be sheeted anyway. And the trailing edge, I'm going to make that out of plywood, just so it's a little bit more robust than if it had been made out of standard balsa. I'll get this jigged up, cut these out in the blocks so they're all identical, and then I'll draw a simple plan out and we'll start thinking about how this middle part can be made and how many ribs that we need to fit in. Okay, I feel like I'm starting to get somewhere now in terms of understanding how this is going to work. So they are the end plates, and there'll also be the jigs for cutting out the ribs that go in the centre. I think I've worked out that I'll need 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, and with those upper spars running along the top and then the whole thing covered in a thin layer of ply, I think that'll give it loads of strength. I've also, when I put this on here and push it on, it's very, very secure, and that's obviously because I've cut the groove into it neat. But it also means, if I show you, if the ribs are mounted like that and then there's another one on the other side, my concern was that the whole thing would rotate. Well, as there'll be a slot for the leg between this rib and a one on the other side, that'll be impossible. So I think I can actually avoid having to make a special template, a metal template that screws into this end one. I don't think it'll be necessary at all, which is great news. So I'll cut out the blanks for these remaining ribs, get them cut out, and then I'll have to draw up a plan to lay it out. Seems an odd way to do things, but when you're working from scratch, so to speak, and you're trying to work things out, this is how I personally go about doing it. Oh, sorry, here's another piece that I've made. The trailing edge I've cut out of lightweight ply, and I've chamfered the back there so that it blends in. and that'll be a lot stronger than balsa, but it's also lightweight as well. Okay, let's get the blanks cut. Here we have a block now of balsa ribs that I've actually shaped, just marking on the position for the spars, and then I'll cut those out with a razor blade and nick them finely out with a knife. The first stage will be to mark these. I'm just putting some guidelines on. It's fairly obvious where they are, but it doesn't do any harm. And I'll actually try to go slightly inside this line, these lines. So here we go. Up to the top. And I can hear when it's starting to hit the ply. And the trailing edge. I've got to mark that one on, never mind. There we go, done. I'll hack it out, take them apart, and I'll have to draw a plan out now. This is the plan then. I admit it's not a lot to look at, but that's the position of the trailing edge. That's the position of the main spar that sits on the axle. And here we have the positions of the ribs. So I'll put some of this food wrap over the top, just so we don't stick to the board. And if I set up the trailing edge first, just put a couple of pins either side to hold that in position. Obviously I can't pin through the plywood even if it is lightweight. And all I've done is try to make sure that they're at right angles to one another, the lines. Just put a couple more in, why not? Okay, and then I'll not pin that yet. What I'll do is I'll use this just to make sure I've got the positioning right. It's a bit of a cheat, I know, but it's the best way I can think to do it. Yeah, that seems to be working. I suspect I might have to fettle or do some fine adjustment on the balsa ones, balsa ribs. And this one, I'm going to use some CA to glue this, just to ensure that everything's square. Just use a square to make sure it's upright. I may reinforce the inside of these later on if I feel it's necessary. That needs just a little bit of a trim at the rear. So we'll do the rest of this as a time lapse because it's pretty tedious, but you get the general idea. Now that that's done, it's a case of adding the top pieces, and once again these may need a little bit of fettling because I've gone for a tight fit. So I'll add the glue in and then gently push them down, and hopefully that'll be the job done. So we'll just pause it while I put these in and then see what it looks like once these have been added, and have a little bit of thought about what the next step's going to be. So literally watching me putting glue in here, so never mind. We'll pause it there, see when they're all in place. Well, it's good morning for me, the morning after the night before. As you can see, here's the axle wing as it stands. Fortunately, I was impatient and I lifted it before it had fully set, and the reason it was fortunate was, if I do this, well, I couldn't do that when I took it off the board, and of course those of you who are a little bit sharper than me will recognise the reason why. I'd measured between the axles, the uprights on the axle at this point, and of course it narrows because it's going in towards the fuselage. So as I'd built it, it wouldn't fit. I took the end two ribs out, shortened everything both sides, and now it fits. And that's a neat fit. But here's the issue, as you can see, I don't want it doing that. I want to be able to set the angle, and for that angle to remain correct at 0 degrees as it happens. So I've made 2 end ribs. I'll drill these out here, fit a collet which is going to be soldered to a plate, and that plate will be screwed to this rib, and when it's fastened to the collet it'll remain in the position that I desire. And I'll line it up with the already completed wing by making a dowel to go through the holes that we used to locate the templates, and that runs all the way through them, and I'll put a dowel that will go through here and through there so it'll line up nice and neatly, and that'll mean that once it's covered I'll also get that nice gap between the undercarriage legs and the end of the wing, which it's present on the full-size prototype but wasn't on the flare version. It was just left like this, and to my eyes that looks wrong anyway. So there's a bit more work involved obviously to do this, but it has the advantage that I can lock this wing in position, and it'll also look more prototypical once it's sheeted over with either thin balsa or ply, depending on what I've got available. So I need to get in the workshop and do a little bit of turning and some drilling and tapping. I've managed to source a couple of small 5BA bolts that I can use to lock it onto the axle. So I'll crack on with that, and when I've made them, I'll bring them back and I'll show you how I think this is going to work. Here then is the solution that I've come up with. The dowels will align with this wing. I've just soldered up these little collets that are tapped for a 5BA bolt, and these 2 holes here will lock this collet to this outer plywood rib, and in turn the bolt will lock it to the axle and I can set the angle. Now, I'm actually not going to do that now. I'm going to do that when I set the wings up, for the same reasons. I want them all lined up at 0 degrees, and I don't want to do it now and then find I've set it up wrong. So when I'm jigging the wings, I'll jig this wing. So that goes like that. I'll take it in a little bit further. That's it. I think that's the limit. And that also gives me the look I'm after. This will be blocked up. That I've seen on the prototypes, but they aren't on the flare model. It stops here, as I've said multiple times now. So this will be completed and it'll blend in, and then the whole thing, I'm going to sheet it. I think that works. I think it's a fairly neat solution. Obviously this will be drilled and pinned. It's heavy enough to take a drill through there. And if we step back a little bit, I think you can see how it looks. I think I'll stop the video there because it's getting quite boring and long. In the next one you'll see this completed and covered. But I hope you found that useful. It's how I work through something where I'm having to make it up on the hoof, and it's fairly typical of the approach. Sometimes it goes right, sometimes it goes wrong, as it did here, because I didn't allow for the rake in of these legs. But overall I'm happy with that. I think it looks really nice. So thanks for following up to now. Give it a thumbs up if you don't mind, and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and you'll see the continued journey of this little project. Take care now.